He stole her family's ranch in a single night. Or at least that's the story Clara Alderidge had carried like a blade in her chest for 20 years. And now she was back, standing at the edge of the very land that had been taken from her, watching the man who ruined her life, as if she might carve it all back out of him piece by piece. The Wyoming wind hadn't changed. It still carried dust and memory in equal measure. And as Clara stood on the ridge overlooking the sprawling Cross Ranch, she could almost see the ghosts of what used to be. The Alderidge cattle grazing where strangers now worked, her father's laughter echoing where silence had settled into something colder. She pulled her coat tighter around her, though it wasn't the chill that made her shiver. It was him, Ethan Cross. The name alone had once been enough to send her into a spiral of anger, so sharp she couldn't breathe. 20 years ago, he had written into their lives like a promise of progress, a young man with ambition and backing from powerful investors, talking about partnerships and expansion, about saving struggling ranches like hers. Her father had believed him. God, how he had believed him. And Clara, barely 12, had watched from the porch as the two men shook hands beneath a sky that seemed too wide to hold the storm coming. The deal had been complicated, full of legal words she hadn't understood, but she remembered the tension in her father's shoulders, the way he'd stayed up nights with ledgers spread across the kitchen table, muttering about debts and drought, and how maybe, just maybe, this Cross boy was their way out. And then the fire came. It started in the east barn just after midnight, flames licking up dry timber, as if the land itself had decided to devour them whole. Clara remembered the smell first, sharp, choking smoke that dragged her from sleep, and then the shouting, her father's voice cutting through the chaos as he rushed to get them out. She remembered clutching her little brother's hand, stumbling barefoot across cold dirt, the sky glowing orange behind them as everything they owned burned. What she didn't remember clearly was the moment her father didn't make it out. That part had blurred into grief so deep it swallowed details, leaving only the aftermath, the ashes, the silence, and Ethan Cross standing at the edge of their ruined world days later with documents in hand and sorrow in his eyes that she had once believed was real. He had claimed the land legally, through debts called in, clauses triggered, signatures already inked before the fire had even cooled, and the territory had accepted it without question. People whispered, of course. They always did. Some said it was bad luck, others said it was inevitability, and a few, quieter voices wondered if the fire had been too convenient. Clara didn't wonder. She knew. In the simple, brutal way a child understands betrayal, she knew that everything had been taken, and Ethan Cross had been the one to take it. The Alderidge name faded after that. Her brother was sent east to relatives who barely wanted him, and Clara learned how to survive. She learned that grief could harden into something useful, that anger could be shaped into purpose, and that the world didn't care about fairness, only power. She worked wherever she could, stables, kitchens, offices, watching, listening, learning how men like Ethan Cross built empires out of other people's losses. Years passed, and the girl who had once cried in the ashes of her home became a woman who no longer cried at all. She built herself piece by piece, trading innocence for sharpness, softness for strategy, until the only thing she carried from her old life was her name and the promise she had made to herself the night everything burned. She would come back. And now she had. The Cross Ranch sprawled beneath her like a challenge, larger than it had ever been under her father's care, thriving in a way that made something bitter twist in her chest. Ethan Cross hadn't just taken their land, he had made it prosper. That, more than anything, felt like an insult. Clara adjusted her gloves and started down the slope, her boots crunching against the dry earth with deliberate steps. She hadn't come here to admire what he'd built. She had come to take it apart. The plan had taken years to craft: quiet acquisitions of nearby land, strategic investments, alliances with the kind of people who understood leverage and patience. But it all led to this moment. To him. She spotted him before he saw her, standing near the main corral with a group of ranch hands, his posture straight, his presence commanding without effort. Time had changed him. He was broader now, harder in ways that had nothing to do with muscle, his dark hair threaded with the faintest hint of gray at the temples. But there was something else, too, something in the way he held himself, like a man carrying weight no one else could see. For a fleeting, unwelcome second, Clara hesitated. Then he turned, as if sensing her gaze, and their eyes met across the distance. The world seemed to narrow to that single point of connection, past and present colliding in a way that made her pulse thunder in her ears. He didn't recognize her. Of course he didn't. To him, she was just another stranger stepping onto his land. But she knew him. She knew the man he had been, the boy who had smiled at her father and promised a better future, the figure who had stood untouched while her world burned. And as she walked toward him, every step steady, every breath controlled, Clara felt the past rise up inside her. Not as pain, not anymore, but as purpose. He had taken her family's ranch once. This time, she would take everything. Clara had imagined this moment for years, but nothing about it felt the way she expected as she stood face to face with Ethan Cross, the man she had sworn to destroy, and found not a monster, but a man who watched her with quiet, unsettling focus. "You're new around here," he said, his voice steady, carrying the authority of someone used to being listened to, and Clara forced herself not to react to the sound of it, not to let the past bleed into the present. "You could say that," she replied, keeping her tone cool. "Clara Hayes. I've been buying land along your eastern border." She watched him carefully as she said it, waiting for irritation, suspicion, something. Instead, his expression shifted only slightly, thoughtful rather than threatened. "I've heard," he said. "You're moving fast." "Opportunity doesn't wait," she returned. Their eyes held, and for a moment it felt less like conversation and more like a test neither wanted to fail. Around them, the ranch moved with quiet efficiency, a living thing that reminded her too much of what had been taken. "Most people don't buy that much land without a reason," Ethan said, more direct now. "So what's yours?" Clara stepped a little closer, letting the tension build. "Control," she said simply. "The kind that comes from owning enough that no one can push you out." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Something flickered in his gaze then, something almost like recognition. "That kind of control comes with a cost," he said quietly. "Everything does." She didn't break eye contact. He studied her longer than necessary, like he was trying to place her, and for a brief, dangerous second, Clara wondered if he somehow knew. But then he stepped back, the moment breaking. "You should come up to the house," he said. "If we're going to be neighbors, we might as well understand each other." It was exactly what she needed: access, proximity, a way in. And yet something about the invitation felt like stepping into deeper water than she had planned. "I like that," she said anyway. Inside, the house was both familiar and wrong, reshaped into something stronger, richer, built on the bones of what her family had lost. Clara kept her face neutral as memories tried to surface, refusing to give him even a hint of recognition. Ethan poured whiskey, handing her a glass with an ease that felt too natural. "To new beginnings," he said. Clara lifted the glass slightly. "To opportunity," she corrected, her voice soft. They drank, silence settling again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was charged, filled with unspoken questions. She set her glass down slowly. "Tell me something," she said, unable to stop herself. "Do you ever think about what this place was before it was yours?" The shift in him was subtle, but she saw it. A tightening in his jaw, a flicker in his eyes. He didn't answer right away. "Every day," he said finally, and the quiet honesty in his voice caught her off guard. Clara frowned slightly. That wasn't the answer she had expected. "And it doesn't bother you?" she pressed. Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her, as if searching for something just beneath the surface. "More than you'd think," he said. The words lingered, heavier than they should have been, and for the first time since returning, Clara felt something shift inside her plan. Not enough to stop her, not even close, but enough to make her realize that the man standing in front of her might not be the villain she had spent 20 years hating. And that made everything far more dangerous. Clara told herself she would destroy him, right up until the moment she realized she no longer wanted to. The truth unraveled slowly, then all at once, buried in old ledgers, whispered accounts, and a name that kept resurfacing like a ghost neither of them had ever faced. The investors who had backed Ethan 20 years ago, the same man who had profited from the fire that took everything from her family. By the time Clara stood in Ethan's study, the evidence in her hands and anger warring with something far more complicated in her chest, she understood the final, unbearable truth. He hadn't stolen her ranch the way she believed. He had been used. You knew something was wrong, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Ethan didn't deny it. He didn't look away either. Not enough, he admitted. But enough that I should have stopped it. The weight of that confession settled between them, heavy and real, and Clara felt the last 20 years of hatred begin to crack, not disappear, but shift into something sharper, more honest. I came back to take it from you, she said, the words no longer a threat, but a confession of their own. A faint, tired smile touched his mouth. I figured as much. He moved past her then, opening a drawer and pulling out a set of documents, placing them on the desk between them. Then take it, he said. Clara blinked. What? The ranch. Legally, financially, it can be yours. I won't fight you. The simplicity of it stunned her more than any resistance would have. Why? She demanded. Ethan's gaze met hers, steady and unguarded in a way she had never seen before. Because I've spent 20 years trying to convince myself I earned this place, he said. But the truth is, part of it was built on something rotten. And if giving it back sets that right, he shrugged slightly. Then maybe it's time. Silence stretched between them, filled with everything they had been and everything they had almost become. Clara looked at the papers, then back at him, and realized something she hadn't expected. Taking it wouldn't feel like victory. Not like this. Not anymore. It won't fix it, she said quietly. None of it. Ethan exhaled, something like relief flickering across his face. I know. And in that moment, Clara made the choice that changed everything. She pushed the papers back toward him. Then we don't fix it by tearing it apart, she said. We fix it by building something better. He frowned slightly. What are you saying? Clara held his gaze, steady and certain now. I'm saying the ranch doesn't need to be taken back. It needs to be made right. She took a breath. Together. The word hung there, fragile and impossible, and somehow inevitable. Ethan studied her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Not as a threat, not as a mystery, but as someone standing on the same broken ground he had been trying to rebuild alone. You'd stay? He asked, quieter now. Clara felt the weight of that question settle deep in her chest, felt the echo of the girl she had been and the woman she had become. I didn't come back for you, she said honestly. But I'm not leaving because of you either. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't even a promise. But it was enough. Something shifted between them then. Not sudden, not overwhelming, but real. The kind of understanding that didn't need words, built from shared loss and hard choices, and the fragile beginning of trust. Outside, the ranch stretched wide beneath the open sky, no longer just a place of what had been lost, but something that could still become. Ethan gave a small nod, something resolute settling into his expression. Then we start there, he said. Clara allowed herself the faintest hint of a smile. Not victory, not revenge, but something quieter, something stronger. He had taken her home once without knowing what it meant. This time, she chose to stay, and together, they would make it theirs.